Welcome to the Town of Avon Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. If you are interested in having a copy of the agenda or the staff reports, there are no opportunities to provide the audience. This meeting is being recorded for the public record. Because of this, we request that personal conversations are kept to a minimum and cell phones are set to vibrate with your phone calls taken outside of the chambers. If you are interested in commenting during any public hearing, please sign up on sheets located on the tables to the right of the audience. When your name is called, please step forward to the podium, state your name and address for the record. Please address your comments to the board and not to staff at the time. The comments should relate directly to the case at hand. You do understand that there may be several persons who wish to speak. The chair may therefore impose a time limit for each person. Federal law requires that the town make available to all attendees the Title VI public involvement survey. The surveys are on the table to the right of the audience. Members of the public who wish to complete the survey may do so and place them in the designated area. If because of a disability, any person in attendance needs assistance or accommodation before participate in this meeting, please note for the staff. Thank you for your assistance in facilitating a respectful, fair, and timely meeting, and welcome to our meeting. Please stand for the pledge of allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Here. Catherine Ransberg.
Here.
Paul Guckenberger.
Here.
Marcus Turner.
Here.
And Marcy Tashler is absent.
Next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the 7/16/24 meeting. Did anyone have any comments, concerns?
I move we approve the minutes of the July 16th meeting.
We have a motion by Mr. Guckenberger. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Ransberg. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Minutes are approved. Requests for continuances or agenda modifications?
We don't have any.
Okay. And public comment. The public may comment on items on the agenda that are not a public hearing or on a specific matter within the council's jurisdiction. Is there anyone who wishes to make public comment at this time that is not for items on the agenda tonight? We open the public hearing at 6:35. And with no one coming forward, we will close it at 6:35. We have no old business, so we will go straight to new business. This is VAR 24-05, 7575 County Road, East 150 South. Staff?
Thank you. VAR 2405 is VAR 2405 is a request for variance of development standards, actually 3 variances from the UDO requirements for signs to allow for installation of a new freestanding sign in front of Avon High School. There we go. Specifically, the 3 variances relate to the height of the sign, the overall sign area, and the fact that the sign would have an electronic message sign component, which is not permitted. The requested sign height is a 12-foot tall sign, where a maximum 6-foot tall freestanding sign is permitted, and the total sign area would be 93 square feet, where a maximum of 40 square feet is permitted. As I mentioned, this would be in front of Avon High School on County Road 150 South. That's the main parcel number. There's actually several parcels there that comprise well over 100 acres. It's a very large property. You're probably aware, this is County Road 150 south here, and this is the high school campus to the south. A little bit closer look here. So while this would be a new sign, it would replace the existing sign, which is fairly similar in design, and in that it also has a electronic variable message sign component. So you can see that the existing sign is farther east next to one of the driveways, which is not now the main driveway. The proposed sign, which would replace that sign, is about 330 feet to the west next to the main driveway that takes you to the main parking areas to the west and southwest of the building. The history on this site, there have been a couple of development plan review approvals recently to allow for additions and renovations at the high school, which when I was there a couple weeks ago, those are ongoing. More relevant to this request, there was a variance granted by the Town of Avon Board of Zoning Appeals in 2010 to legally establish a freestanding sign that exceeded 6 feet in height and to legally establish an electronic message sign. Our understanding is the sign that was there then had been there for quite some time, and we believe that was erected when the property was under the county jurisdiction. The variance in 2010 legally established that sign height, which was 10.5 or 11 feet tall. And the reason a variance was requested at that time is because they were changing out the electronic message sign component to replace that with a new panel. And so that was what prompted the variance request, and that was approved in 2010. Again, there's 3 variances being requested, which are similar to those approved in 2010. And the changes are outlined here. The sign height now, this proposed sign would have a maximum height of 12 feet versus about 11 feet with the existing sign. The sign area would be this is the overall sign area, which includes both the electronic message component as well as the static copy of the sign, which I believe would just read Avon High School. That total sign area is 93 square feet proposed versus 90 square feet existing. And the electronic message sign would be 78 square feet versus 59 square feet existing. As mentioned, the new sign location would be west of the existing sign. It would be near what is now the main vehicular entrance into the Avon High School campus, adjacent to the signalized intersection with Maria Lane versus the existing location, which is down near the intersection with James Drive. This is a site map showing the proposed location of the existing sign. It's right there in black. The proposed sign is there in black. The existing sign is down at this entrance, and that would be removed. This is a graphic of the proposed sign. This is a photo of the proposed sign, the base of which was installed prior to application for a sign permit. When our building inspectors noticed that going up and knew that there wasn't a sign permit, they stopped construction on that, and the variance application was filed shortly after that. This is facing east. You can see County Road 150 South in the background. The school would be off to the right. That's another picture facing basically the same direction from farther back, but you can see the school obviously in the background. You can see the signalized intersection where the sign would be adjacent to. This is a view looking back the other direction, looking west. You can see the sign here. That's a picture looking north from the school's internal access drive, facing north towards County Road 150 and the adjacent residential development in the background that's north of County Road 150. This is a view of the existing sign. which you can see is similar in design. That's facing west along County Road 150. That's just a closer look at that. The sign, it would be slightly taller. It would have a slightly greater sign area, and the electronic message sign component would be about a third larger than what is existing. We do believe the increases can be justified given the growth of the school campus, its increased enrollment, and the corresponding number of events and activities that occur there, which were the basis for the variance being approved, similar variances being approved in 2010. We believe that the potential impact on the public and surrounding properties should be similar to that of the existing sign. So we do believe that the proposal meets all the required findings of fact, and we do recommend approval of the variance subject to substantial compliance with the site plan and sign elevation that are on file, and of course, subject to removal of the existing sign. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Questions for staff?
I do have a question about, it looks like the physical dimensions of the sign are going to be pretty similar, but then it talks about the electronic message is going to be 33% larger. Can you talk a little bit about that, or is that a question for the petitioner?
If you're asking why they proposed one that's larger,
I just
I'm
would
not
like to
sure.
know, I'm not exactly sure what that means. The electronic component will be 30% larger. It means the electronic screen will be bigger?
Correct. So in this photo, that's the existing sign, and the black piece on top,
Okay.
which it has, I don't think it's been running lately, but that's where the messages would show up. And then on the proposed sign, it would be the part on the top where it says new digital sign. Similar to existing in size is what it reads, but it would be, again, about a third larger overall.
I'm
And
assuming that means mostly wider because it's not going to be that much taller, right?
Well, I think it's a little bit taller because I think the base of this sign is a bit shorter than the base of the existing sign.
Okay.
So I think that, and the petitioner may have info on that, I think the base of the existing sign is closer to 7 or 8 feet tall. And then the message board on top of it is 3.5 feet tall, maybe. And then on the proposed sign, I believe the base is 6 feet. Yeah, I believe the base is 6 feet, and the message sign on top would also be 6 feet tall. So the increase would be more, vertical top to bottom on the digital message sign, as opposed to being wider.
So they're basically reworking the components within a similar dimensional space,
Yes, I would say that's an accurate
making the base smaller and
assessment.
making the signage larger.
Correct.
Okay.
Paul, could you go back to, I think, the second slide of your presentation?
This one?
Back to the part where you talk about, keep going. Keep
Is
going.
it text or what?
The text, yes. Not that one. The next one, where it talks about meeting the,
Oh, I think that was at the end.
okay. In bullet number 2, so when I listen to what you said and I read that, is that basically the size of development justifies the size of the sign?
Yes. Yes. The justification for granting the variances in 2010 was that the school basically had a lot of information that they needed to provide to the public. We think that the case can be made that that same need exists.
Okay, let me.
But I believe that go ahead if you want.
So I'm trying to follow the logic here that you're presenting, is that when you have a larger development with more activities, we need a larger sign. And I'm trying to see how that plays out in any case that comes forward to us on that, because it's like, if I have a large development, I should have a large sign. So that's something I have a question about, and we'll ask the petitioner. I also have a question about, have you calculated the light pollution that could come from this sign if it is fully illuminated?
Okay. So yeah, to follow up on your question about the justification, yes, I mean, we do think that to some extent, the very large size of this one property at 138 acres is indicative of the amount of activities that do occur there and the amount of information that they have a need to provide to the public. And there are there are parts of the sign code in the UDO that do allow for larger sites to have more than one sign. They're not asking for, multiple identification signs here. So, I mean, that could be part of the justification as well. But specifically, we were also referring to the fact that the campus has grown. I think enrollment is close to double what it was in 2010 when the previous variances were approved. So given that the increase in the sign is not nearly as large as the increase in the activity on the campus, we thought that was reasonable. And on your second question regarding to the light that it emits, we have not looked at that. I don't think that the ordinance regulates lighting that is coming from a sign. I mean, we do have standards for outdoor, for actual lighting, facilities, light poles, that kind of thing. But that's not something that we have looked at.
We've always considered, when we look at signage, the effect the lighting is going to have on the area. And that is a major concern from myself and others. The justification that you can increase the size of a sign by the number of people that cross a campus, we've turned bigger signs down before. So we never could have used that as a justification.
Total Wine asked for a
Yeah,
waiver
that's what I'm thinking of.
specifically, because they are a big place and they wanted a larger sign, and I voted to allow it, but we turned it down because just because you're big doesn't mean you get a bigger sign. These are what the ordinances are. I don't find that a compelling, especially when we're not talking about going from we're talking about being a little bit bigger, and the total geometrically speaking. But the thing I'm concerned about, as you said, we've always considered, what's the coffee place there in Dan Jones?
Ziggy's.
Thank you. At Ziggy's, we had a long conversation about the impact of their signage on the neighborhood across the street, of the lights and that. So that we've always considered the signage. We have a letter from a neighbor who talks specifically about that, moving the sign. He brings up some other things that really can't be addressed anymore, having to do with the parking lot lighting and that kind of thing. But moving that sign to the new location will put it directly by his home, and it will directly impact him. So I agree. We've always considered the impact of illumination on the surrounding areas when it comes to signage.
Any more discussion on that? I had a question before going forward. I know you're anticipating this. Typically in our staff reports for requests for variances, we've always had 5 criteria for granting variances. All of them are statutory, but 2 of them are optional, and it's my understanding the council/plan commission took action and approved those 2 optional items. Looking through this staff report, we only have 3 criteria. We don't have the criteria asking if the requested variance is the minimum necessary, and we're also missing the criteria that asks if this was caused, the need for the variance was caused by the petitioner. Would you mind explaining why we're down to 3 right now?
So as we were updating our applications in the past couple of months, we looked at what was in our applications, whether it be for variances, zoning amendments, special exceptions, what have you, and wanted to make sure that the information that we were requiring was consistent with the Unified Development Ordinance. And in doing so, we examined the Unified Development Ordinance and found that there are only 3 findings of fact required for a variance of development standards. The other 2 that you're referencing were in the old zoning ordinance, but when the Unified Development Ordinance was adopted in 2022, those were not included. So it was our judgment that we couldn't require petitioners to meet those findings if they were not included in the ordinance.
Why are we trained on 5?
What was the question again?
Why are we trained on 5?
Well, see,
If we're going to discount 2 of them.
That's why I brought it up, because every case that we've had this year, well, for the past couple of years, have had 5 criteria.
I think
think-
that what he's saying is that, the rules have changed. It's like, why do we have a shot clock on I don't know sports, obviously, but why do we didn't used to have a shot clock in basketball. Now we have a shot clock in basketball. And I think what you're saying is that under the old ordinances, there were 5 criteria. We now are operating under the new ordinances, and there are only 3 criteria. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Whether intentional or not, they were not carried over into the new ordinance.
Have we always had a shot clock in basketball?
I might just
Yeah.
say 2 things. I think it's important to remember a couple things. First of all, the ordinance articulates why we regulate signs. So in 6.14, it says, what is the purpose of our regulation? And so in a difficult sign case, it might be good just to quickly revisit them. And that is, we're trying to promote traffic and pedestrian safety. Secondly, we're trying to promote the town's unique zoning districts. Third, encouraging good design and enhance the development environment. Fourth, promote development that enhances property values. And this goes to a couple of points you've made. Fifth, preserving open space. Sixth, a very traditional standard, which is we're trying to minimize visual clutter. And 7th, trying to protect health, safety, and general welfare. And so those underpin the factors. And this is the why we regulate signs, and the town has a tradition of being pretty strict about signs. Lastly, I might say that in response to the question about illumination and how bright it will be, your ordinance, your UDO doesn't have standards for that because you don't allow these kinds of signs. And so you as a BZA, though, in considering granting a variance, could impose conditions on the brightness of the sign when it is operational, those sorts of things. You have the right to impose conditions on that. And so, keep that in mind also. And then lastly, I would say, I would remember your decision on a variance, you're asked to make 3 findings, so those would all need to be in the affirmative. But even if they are in the affirmative, you still have discretion to deny. If they can't show evidence that supports the 3 factors, then you should deny.
Any other questions for staff? If there are none, we're ready to hear from petitioner.
Thank you, board. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time in reviewing this variance request. My name is Doug Franklin with Performance Services. Address is 4670 Haven Point Boulevard, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46280. As outlined, we're requesting a sign at Avon High School. The existing one will be removed once this one is installed. As Mr. Lambie pointed out, the characteristics of the sign and makeup are very similar in size. The actual square footage, counting the brick and the digital part of the new sign, is actually 7 square feet longer or smaller than the existing square footage of the sign. So the existing area total of the current sign is 191 square feet, where the new sign is 184 square feet in size. Obviously, he talked about some of the proportions of that sign being a little bit different as well. One reasoning for kind of the larger footprint of the sign, so one, it can be easier read from walking or the roadway, and the amount of data that they are posting on the sign as well for events, closings, delays, and that nature. One other thing to point out, we've heard the concern about sign pollution, especially in the evening. We've heard some concerns about the residents there. The school is proposing from a 10 p.m. To 6 a.m. that the sign could be just a black. There's no illumination or lights emitting from that. So from a 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., that signboard could then has the ability to be turned basically off or black during those times. I'll be happy to answer any questions or comments that you have.
Before we get into questions, let's go ahead and open up the public hearing. It is 6:59. Has anyone signed up to speak?
No one other than Mr. Franklin has signed up to speak.
Okay. Is there anyone who is not signed up that wishes to speak? Okay, and then I'll also point out, we do have a letter on our desk from a resident, and we're in receipt of that. I'm assuming you have that same letter.
I do, yep. And I just wanted to share the sign capabilities. Currently, the sign does not.
Hang on.
Oh, go
We
ahead.
still got so with no one coming forward, we're going to close the public hearing at 7 p.m. You can continue.
Yeah, currently the sign does not turn off, so that would be, the new sign has the capabilities of that feature as well, of basically going black during certain criteria time sets.
Is the signage white lettering on black background when there are messages being displayed?
Yeah, so they can change that or manipulate that. A lot of times it's the black background with the yellow Avon lettering in the back. So that will be the typical, probably what we see the most as far as the images of the letters being in a kind of a yellow font. They have the ability to change that based on what's going on at the school, though.
So from what's been presented, as I understand it, the digital sign is 33% larger than what's there today. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the square footage, it's a little bit different. The new square footage digital sign area is 78 square feet. I know you had noted 59 square feet. I came up with a calculation of 63 square feet. So we're about 15 square feet difference. So as far as the sign body, what they call this digital sign portion.
Okay. So, and you even indicated in your comments too, that the amount of information and data that the school displays, there's lots going on. And that kind of hits the heart of the first point that Mr. Taylor made with signs is there's a lot of information that's changing constantly on an electronic sign, possibly, or maybe it's static and just changes more easily from the office. But that's a safety factor that we consider. That's why we don't see electronic billboards on 36 for that. So now we've got a display that's larger with changing information that causes drivers to be looking at that. And then that's one of the considerations too that I'm thinking about as far as a safety issue here. If we have a larger electronic sign constantly changing data, distracting drivers, now we're getting into high school drivers going down 150 South. So that's, again, one of the concerns I have around doing this, as well as the last question I have. Is this under construction and it got halted because you didn't apply for this before it was noticed?
That is correct. So we did stop construction because the permit was not obtained for that previously. So yes, we did halt construction.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, will this sign be, the electronic portion limited only to text, or will it have images also and other movement?
They could have the Avon seal, the Avon High School seal, like a logo or a graphic on there. As far as movement, the sign is, I believe, no movement or motion as far as like animation, I would say, on the sign itself.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's not really like a TV screen, it's more
No,
of
you're
a-
not going to see live Avon High School football clips running on that. Sorry. So,
Okay.
so
Will the letters trail across the screen, or will they just be static once displayed?
yeah. So there's different methods that those letters can kind of go off the screen. Some of them could kind of roll off the screen. Some of them could just change or just flip over. So there's different methods that those kind of rotate.
I think I understand what Mr. Taylor is getting at, in that if we have, and also what Mr. Gluckenberger was referencing, if you have messages that are scrolling across the screen, in order to see what those messages are, you're going to have to watch that screen and keeping your eyes on, instead of keeping your eyes on the road, as opposed to having a static message, which changes every 5 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever. I don't know what the standard is for that. So I would be concerned about having, even though you're not going to have, highlights from last night's game on there, I would be concerned about having a lot of textual animation happening on the sign. And I'm sure the software can be manipulated for whatever purpose you need. I'm assuming.
It's my understanding that the old sign did not have the capability to scroll, or did it?
That I don't know if the old sign had the capability to scroll or not. I do not know that.
Any other questions or discussion? Yeah, just general discussion, that's fine.
Yeah, so when I look at criterion 3 on practical difficulty and what's been proposed, what's been what in staff's report, it doesn't seem like there's a practical difficulty here. It's a desire. It's got a large development, so need a larger sign. And to me, that equates to, could we see that with the other schools in the area as they grow, that their signs will need to grow because we've got larger schools going on? Then will it be applied to developments? We need larger signs because we have a 100-acre development. So I don't see the practical difficulty versus the desire for a bigger sign to get more information. So I'm with criterion 3, I will struggle with that one. I'd appreciate other comments.
With respect to criteria 2, so this is the use and value of the adjacent property, including the variance being effective in a substantially adverse manner. We've got a letter in front of us from Mr. Friel, who lives directly across the street. And certainly I think that letter, at least at a minimum, casts doubts on meeting that criteria. Whether it affects everyone in that area in the same manner, I don't know, but we know that there's at least one. And moving on to criteria 3, which is basically the practical difficulty. What strikes me is that the petitioner's response, so it's asking, is there a practical difficulty? Petitioner says, yes, the school would like to maintain a similar size and style of the sign. Clearly, they're indicating a preference and have not stated any practical difficulty. Going on to staff's response, They say it's a big site. I think what staff has done is exactly what they said at the beginning of this, trying to justify it and not necessarily stating a practical difficulty. I have seen no practical difficulty stated here. And if you know of one, if there is a practical difficulty, now's your time to state it. But I have not seen a practical difficulty stated in this petition.
I think what I think they're trying to attempt is that it has less to do with the overall dimensions of the sign, which aren't being asked to be increased that much. They want more message space, and that can be accomplished within the current parameters that they've already received 10 years ago through that waiver. I'm assuming we don't have any ordinances or anything that says if you build a sign structure, only a certain percentage of it can be dedicated to signs. I don't think we have that. So I don't know that increasing, and I don't know, can you pull back to where they said that this increase? I mean, we're talking about a size, an overall size increase being minimal, but the message part is being allocated differently, and they can do that within the parameters that they already have. So I agree with there. I appreciate very much the promise or commitment, I guess it would be, to turn the signs off and basically have a black screen between 10 and 6. I appreciate that. That's a nice accommodation of this, and we've always had a good working relationship with the school, and so I appreciate that myself. I would like to see another commitment that the use, and I don't know how the wordage would be, but the use of animated text be limited, because as it was pointed out, we're talking about teenage drivers and parents who are screaming at their kids to stop hitting their sister and all the other things that happen at school drop-off first thing in the morning and in the afternoon. So I would want there to be, and I don't know enough about the technicalities of that to even know how to word that. But I don't know that you need a slightly larger sign structure in order to have a larger message space.
So I do have a question for Dan, that does the special exception that was approved in 2010 carry forward if they're physically moving, relocating, building a new sign? Or does that special exception only apply to the current sign in its current location? Okay. Okay.
Variance, and it applies to the sign, the existing sign only. It's specific to the sign. It's, so this is a new sign requires a whole new look.
Okay. So this has to be addressed. It's not like if we don't, they've got to have something in place because they're putting in a brand new sign.
Correct.
Okay.
So the new sign, unless we grant a variance, is subject to the ordinances, not subject to the variance that was granted 10 years ago.
That's correct. Yeah, the existing sign can stay because that's been approved. A new sign has to meet all your standards. And I think the petitioner's statement was it's very similar to what you approved once. And I think that's what they're trying to get to. But yeah, I think you're correct in the way you articulate that.
So do you have information, and this would go to staff? I see that what you're here is you're comparing the old sign to the new sign, but do you have information comparing what the requirements would be under the ordinances versus what is being requested? Because are we talking about a minimal increase in sign? Since I was operating off, I was
I think we got
mistakenly,
significant.
yeah, I mean, it may be much more than just 12 to versus 11 feet.
It is actually right in the beginning of the staff report. It's 12 feet is the request, 6 feet allowed, 93 square feet of area requested,
Okay, I
40
see.
square
Thank
feet
you.
allowed. And
Yep.
yeah, the electronic message is not permitted at all. So yeah, Paul laid that out early in his
Okay.
report.
I apologize. I was using my brain for other things.
If I might try to address your question about how you might regulate whether the messages move on the screen. Just a suggestion, you could ask the petitioner if they would agree to a condition that the sign, the electronic message component would only display static messages, not to change more frequently than every 8 seconds. I believe 8 seconds is a frequent standard that's used for digital billboards that typically they don't have moving text or messages, and they're often regulated that the message has to stay up for at least 8 seconds before changing. So that seems reasonable. Also, if the board wanted to consider asking for a condition that would address light pollution or spillage, a suggestion would be that you might ask the petitioner if they would agree to a condition that submission of a lighting plan by a qualified design professional indicating that light trespass will not exceed what is allowed by UDO 6.10A prior to issuance of a permit, and that the sign would comply with that standard in perpetuity. 6.10A of the UDO allows a maximum light trespass of 0.30 foot candles onto adjoining public right-of-way, or 0.10 foot candles onto adjoining agricultural or residential use.
What was that ordinance again?
6.10A. And if I can go back just to comment on some of the questions and concerns about the sign size. And obviously, I'm not here to convince you one way or the other necessarily, but just to give you kind of some of staff's background into our thinking on that. I know I mentioned it being a 138-acre site. I would note that, the school is zoned R1, but schools can be zoned, well, they can be permitted in any zoning district in the town of Avon. And we do have in the UDO the possibility of a maximum of a 20-foot tall sign and 100 square foot sign area in commercial areas where you have an integrated center, which is where, our thinking is that this campus is as large or larger than most of the commercial sites along US 36 that would qualify as integrated centers and qualify for a 20-foot tall, 100 square foot sign. So that's just kind of a window into our thinking as to how this site compares to those. Obviously, it's different looking at an institutional education use versus a commercial use. You might think, they have different sign needs. But we thought with the amount of information that the school district usually wants and needs to try to get out to the community, that a minor increase over what was permitted by variance in 2010 and still well within the boundaries of what could be permitted for a commercial integrated center that, might be on a much smaller 40-acre site. That's kind of why we thought the size was reasonable.
Is it staff's opinion that perhaps the UDO requirements relating to school signage should be updated? So instead of 6 feet, maybe it should be updated. I mean, we can't do that now, obviously, but is based upon what I'm hearing, schools could be in a commercial area, which means they could have a 20-foot sign. Is that what you're saying? This is a residential area. So it's a different
It is.
requirement.
I don't think the most schools in Avon are in our districts, are in residential districts. Only one I know of is in a commercial district. So having signage of this type just permitted at all the schools, I don't know that we want to jump to that type of change in the ordinance. The high schools usually looked at a little bit differently. It's a bigger campus, bigger events, more things to put out to the community, to the parents. And clearly that's what the board thought in 2010. And that's kind of what we looked for, things to try to make our decision. And the biggest one we looked to was in 2010, the board thought there was a practical difficulty. And so we took that into play at first. And is this one much different? No, it's not. It's moving, yes, but it's generally the same standard, or the same sign that has been there. So if this were coming in today, we'd probably want the design a little bit different, not just a electronic board on top. We would want it more integrated with the sign, but because it was the guidance we were given from the 2010 variance from this board, that's the reason the recommendation went the way it did. But I wouldn't want to change the ordinance for signs at all the schools.
Was your motivation, did you start building the new sign because the most important thing was you needed to move that sign 300 feet or so for strategic reasons, not so you could build a little bigger sign with bigger message board?
Yeah, so the reason for moving the sign is the new main entry is shifted to the west. So we did not want to leave that existing sign in place. We didn't want to have parents, students get that confused and visitors confused with the new main entrance, because it was their current main entrance into the door number 1, and has since shifted to where the light is now. So that is where you'll be entering the site. So that's the reason for the move and the change of the site.
So we've talked about several different conditions, and I guess I'd ask you if we would look to impose the conditions on any approval, are you prepared to accept those on behalf of your client, or do you need to go back and have that discussion? Because I have 3, maybe 4 conditions that we might impose on this. Further discussion being hours of operation, which you've already offered, but static messaging, light, I call light pollution. I think there's something else, and meeting an ordinance that you probably haven't considered because it's not imposed on signs. And there is one other that I was going to ask the staff to help me with, but are you prepared to do that? So I'm looking at, do we have a continuance here where you need to talk with the school system, or are you prepared to make those commitments?
You know, what I would like to do is get kind of what your recommendation as far as the contingencies are. We talked about one, just the 8 seconds between changing messages. So I'd like to get kind of all of that documented in kind of an order, then review with the owner, and then come back to make sure we're all in agreement kind of with those findings. So
I think that makes sense.
I think that's a waste of time. Again, I think the doubt's been cast on criteria 2 and on criteria 3. I haven't heard what the practical difficulty is. And to attack it from the other angle of what is the practical difficulty, if we don't grant this variance, it's still a school. Buses still go in and out, students still go in and out. There's no impact on the use of the property.
And that was my last point, going to be that still have to address practical difficulty, because we haven't heard a practical difficulty. And if you won't meet that criterion, so we can't really approve it if you can't meet that criterion.
So the sign, may I just touch upon again, the new sign that we're proposing, the total area is 7 square feet than less than the existing sign is there. So what we're actually proposing in total footprint square footage is 7 square feet less than what's there. And obviously, you know, we talked about the design staying very consistent to what is currently there as well. So The difficulty is, not really the difficulty, but the need is to get more information out to a larger audience. As touched on before, the campus is larger than most industrial sites. So getting that information out and, having the ability now to basically black the sign from that 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., which is currently not the case. So that's the technicality as far as wanting to provide better communication, not only to passerby, but also everybody. As you've seen, there's a new walkway path for that. For that information could be read and shared by them as well. So
I think the problem is that we came into this, and I think I myself at least, we were looking at comparing it to the old sign. But the problem is you're putting it in a new place. So the comparison to the old sign, while is okay for conversational purposes, for ordinance purposes, is irrelevant, because we have to look at the ordinance, which says a 6-foot sign. I myself struggle with the idea with, and we've had this conversations before, I think a 6-foot sign for a high school the size of Avon High School is too small. And I understand that's what the ordinance does. Is there a practical difficulty that meets whatever we, believe should be a practical difficulty? Is there a challenge meeting that? Yes. But as it was pointed out to us, we still have discretion. And I believe that even if we haven't met the practical difficulty, which I agree is not, it's not like this is the only place we can put the sign because the rest of the site is swamp. We don't have that challenge. It's just a matter of, for purposes of the redesign of the school, this is a better place for the sign. Is that a practical difficulty? Probably not. But I do think that it makes sense for that sign to be there. I would object to the sign being larger. I think sticking to the criteria of the previous variance, because ultimately it's really not about whether it's 8 feet tall or 10 feet tall or 12 feet tall. It's about how big is the actual sign itself. That's my bigger concern. I would not object to there being a sign there and to being granted the waivers or the variances so that it could be larger than the ordinances say. But, we live in the real world. This is a huge high school, and to require it to have the same kind of little sign that is in front of the 2 elementary schools across the street from my neighborhood makes no sense to me.
one thing I will touch upon in the sign location you had mentioned, we are positioned that to avoid utilities, fiber, a force main by WCCD, a lot of utilities that are out there. So the location was really kind of the best location to avoid the utilities, but also to alert people that this is the new main entrance to the high school.
The other thing I was thinking about as far as the continuance is provide direction. They need to address the practical difficulty so that if it comes back with the same reasoning as what's in here now, that's not a practical difficulty.
Although
So
he did
that
just
they
raise
would-
something.
They would have to address that because again, it's like, can we ignore criterion 3 and approve the variance? I think we would get advice that no, we can't. So there has to be, what is the practical difficulty? You were leading into that. So that would be part of the guidance that I would like to give the petitioner is you got to give us a practical difficulty that you're really addressing. I would like staff to make sure it is a practical difficulty, not it's a big site and we need more information.
I think that you just alluded, I wish you'd brought this up earlier. It's not just a matter of the whole main entrance has changed, and the purpose of that sign, aside from giving information, is to make people understand this is the new entrance.
Mm-hmm.
That gets a lot closer to practical difficulty than we just have a whole lot of stuff going on that we need to let people know about.
Yeah.
This is, trying to make sure you're directing people into the new entrance, that they understand the new traffic patterns and stuff is a lot closer to that.
And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing with the new location, demoing the existing, positioning the new sign in front of the what will be and what currently is acting as the new main entrance to the site. And then the location is basically where there's fiber, there's gas, electric, a force main from WCCD that are out there that we position that obviously within the right of way of that to avoid those utilities as well.
But you would be moving the sign anyway.
That's correct. Because
So,
because
where you moved it to is based upon but the fact that you're moving it at all is so that you can direct people to the new entrance.
that is correct. Yeah.
But
So we don't want people confused that the old location is the main entrance. So
But changing the location of the sign and directing people to the entrance, that can be accomplished with any sign of any size. It doesn't have to be an electronic sign. It could be a monument sign that already fits within our ordinances.
Mr. Turner, may I just, assuming there's an ongoing conversation about potential conditions, and I understand there may not be, but I would ask the BZA to think about background color. Because on signs like this, on our traditional sign regulation has wanted the letters to be lighter than the background, particularly on an illuminated sign or video sign, electronic sign. That gets to be a big issue. If that background is white, the distractive nature of it is much different than if it's a black background. So I would ask you to think about that in the same way that you're thinking about static, periodic changes, but static in nature, no trailing, and also the light trespass issue. The background color, I think, is important. If you all don't go that direction, that's fine. But if you talk about that, I think background contrast, darker contrast than lettering is an important factor.
And that's actually goes to a safety issue because white on black is easier to read quickly. It's why nurses' watches are almost always have a black face with white hands because it's easier to read quickly. And I think, so you can read it faster, which makes it safer for drivers.
Yeah. And I think that would be consistent with what we have considered in the past too. And I think of Best Buy as an example of a case that wanted to come in and use yellow as the background, like now our ordinance said, darker background, lighter colored letters.
What is the pleasure of the board?
I think we owe it to the petitioner and to our school system to give them an opportunity to come back and address the concerns that, and if the petitioner would like to ask for continuance, this would be an appropriate time. Wouldn't it?
So I have several here listed. So just looking, Marcos, how you want to proceed here.
It's up to the group.
I would recommend that we continue this and give the guidance and I'm glad you're asking for that, but of what the conditions that we're thinking about. And I think to your point too, is like, there's two criteria that really need to be addressed, criterion 2 and criterion 3. The letter that we received is an indication of criterion 2 to the point you made. And I think criterion 3, you got to address practical difficulty or else I can't vote for this if there's no practical difficulty.
It's a statutory requirement.
Right.
And I think it's important that you emphasize to your client that the decisions made about the old sign don't matter. We're going back to what the ordinances say. This is a brand new sign on a brand new site. If it was the same in the same place, I believe correctly, then it'd be a different conversation, but it's not. So comparing it to what we had before, that was a decision made 14 years ago, different board. And so I think if that comes up in your conversations with them, it's important that they understand we can't, that's not something we can consider. So.
Would you like me to lay out what I have here or?
It's up to you.
I think
You
maybe
want a
it would be
motion or
good
do you
to, well, I think it would be good first to make sure petitioner understands what conditions and commitments we are wanting to have addressed.
Well, let me go through the conditions that I've recorded, and I think others have recorded this, but one was the hours of operation, and you had mentioned this, and that was why I was thinking hours of operation would be between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. would be.
Our,
That's
let
already
me
in the
clarify
condition.
that. Hours of non-operation would be from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Yes, the hours of operation
That-
are 6 a.m. to 10
Yeah,
p.m.
yeah, that's correct, yeah.
So.
Yeah.
That the board would have minimum static messaging with changing, how did you say that, Paul? You stated that.
Yeah, I believe what I indicated is that the sign would be limited to static messages, not to exceed, not to change more frequently than every 8 seconds.
Okay.
That was the suggestion.
Okay, that was one. The third condition that was brought up and I agree and would support with is the background color must be darker than the letters. And I don't know if the board requires a color, but it has to be darker than the letters. And then, and Paul, I'd ask for your help on this 6.10A. Is that the light pollution?
That's the ordinance for the illumination.
Yes, that's the standard for typical lighting that would limit light trespass to no more than 0.3 foot candles onto the adjacent right of way.
Data getting a expert or consultant that.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously at the board's discretion, whether you want to, I was suggesting a commitment that that if it was approved, there'd be a condition that they'd have to submit a light plan showing that they would meet that standard before we'd issue a permit. But if you're continuing it, you could say you want them to agree to that condition, or you could ask them to provide, more specific information on light trespass.
Yeah, because I think that would go to then the gist of the letter. Those are the 4 that I had. I'm going to make a motion, and you'll entertain a motion.
Yeah, I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we continue VAR 2405. Will 1 month be adequate for you, sir?
Oh, that's more than enough, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
That we continue this to the October meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals.
A second.
We have a motion by Mr. Guckenberger and a second by Mrs. Ransberg. Is there any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Guckenberger,
For.
Inman. 4. Ransberg. 4. Turner.
Against? Okay, we are continued. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Moving on down the agenda. This is special exception 24-03, 8795 County Road, 200 North. Staff?
Thank you again. SC 2403, 8759 East County Road, North. This is a request for approval of a special exception to allow for an accessory dwelling unit in the R1 district. This site is located on the south side of County Road 200 North, less than approximately a quarter mile, probably a little less than a quarter mile west of County Road 900 East. It's about 1.25 acres. It is this lot right here, which you can see is considerably larger than the adjacent lots. It is surrounded by residential development on 3 sides. single-family homes all around on those three sides to the north and, I'm sorry, to the west and south. Those are single-family homes in the town of Avon. There are single-family homes that are not within the town boundaries to the east, and then to the north across County Road 200 North is a unimproved parcel previously used agriculturally. Seems to be idle now, a little bit overgrown. Accessory dwelling units, or I may just refer to those as ADUs, they are permitted by right now per the Unified Development Ordinance, or UDO, in the Ag and E1 estate districts, and they are permitted through a grant of special exception in the R1, R2, and R3 districts. ADUs are a way to allow for flexibility and diversity in the housing stock, especially to allow some additional units in already developed areas, and the idea is to allow flexibility for households. A lot of times these are what are referred to as in-law quarters. Can allow for aging in place or for families to be together on one property. Just as a little bit of history, the previous zoning ordinance did not allow accessory dwelling units per se. It did allow as a use accessory apartments, but only in the ag district. So when the UDO was adopted, and I believe this was following up on a recommendation of the comp plan to have more flexibility and more variety in housing options, it was added in as a by right permitted use, not only in ag, but in the estate E1 district. And it was added as a special exception use in R1, R2, and R3. This site is zoned R1. It was annexed into the county just a couple of years ago. I'm going to take you through some photos here. This is looking south across County Road 200 North. The primary dwelling is seen here on the west end of the site. And this detached garage is the approximate location for the accessory dwelling unit. That's a look at the proposed garage. When this was initially filed, the proposal was to build on the existing foundation of the garage with a small addition on the front end of it. And I believe the idea at that point was to reuse some of the existing wall structures as well. However, because this existing detached garage only has a 2-foot setback from the east side property line, it wouldn't comply with the UDO requirement for a minimum 7-foot side yard setback. So staff indicated, so there was initially a variance filed to allow for the ADU to have a 2-foot side setback, because although the UDO specifically makes allowances for a UDO to go into an accessory building, when it's changed, which this would be by the addition that would need to be added to make it a reasonable size, then it's required to comply with all of the underlying R1 standards, including the 7-foot side yard setback. So staff indicated to the petitioner that we didn't see that there'd be a practical difficulty because of the size of the site. There's adequate space that an ADU could be built and meet the side yard setback. So in response to staff's concern about the practical difficulty test on the side yard setback, the petitioner revised their plans. So the ADU will still be located generally here. Their plan is to reuse part of the foundation, but they would take off the eastern 5 feet so that they would meet the minimum 7-foot side yard setback, and then they would expand a bit to the west as well as in the front. That's just a close-up of the building that it would have been wise for me to jump to a little bit earlier in my presentation. This is a view from where the existing detached garage is, looking west back to the primary dwelling. This is just a view approximately from the proposed ADU location looking south to the adjacent residential properties. And then this is from the front of the existing detached garage, the ADU location looking north towards County Road 200. That's a picture looking east towards the abutting property. They have just, for whatever it's worth, they have a couple of accessory buildings that I believe, by my rough calculation in the field, do meet the 7-foot side yard setback. But they're pretty close to where this existing building is. And then that's just a view looking east along the front of County Road 200 towards the abutting dwellings there. Here's a copy of the site plan. Again, here's County Road 200 at the north end of the property. Here's the existing primary dwelling. This is where the proposed accessory dwelling unit or ADU would be located. There is, should have pointed out probably in one of the photos, there is already an existing driveway that's probably been here, I presume, for decades. They would make use of that and then pave a concrete drive back to the accessory dwelling unit to provide off-street parking there. These are the elevations. On top is the front elevation that would face County Road 200. And you have the side elevation that would face east at the bottom. The side elevation facing west back towards the primary dwelling at the top, and then the rear elevation at the bottom, which would face south. We would note, just generally speaking, that this being put, an ADU being added to the UDO as a special exception use presumes that this type of development can certainly be permitted in these districts with a little bit of obviously heightened review through the special exception process coming before you. We would note this site is larger than any of the surrounding residential parcels, and that adding an ADU to this site, we don't believe would give the appearance of an increase in density above the development pattern in the neighborhood. In fact, being on an acre and a third, the density would still be considerably lower than any of the surrounding development. If I can just refer back to this map, and you can see all of the surrounding parcels are smaller, considerably smaller to the south, but definitely smaller both to the east and west as well. We would note the building elevations for the ADU have been revised. When the petitioner first came to us for a preliminary meeting, they were proposing lap siding on the building. The UDO does require that when an accessory dwelling unit is in a detached building, that it needs to match the style and the type of materials and the location of those materials to the primary dwelling. So because the primary dwelling is brick up to the gables, then the petitioner needed to revise their elevations so they would have brick up to the gables and then lap siding above the gables. And then they would have a similar, also a 1-foot overhang on the roof eaves, which is similar to the primary dwelling. And again, as I mentioned, the UDO doesn't require additional off-street parking for an ADU, but they are proposing that on their plan. Again, this would take the place of the existing detached garage that has just a 2-foot east side yard setback. This would meet the 7-foot side yard setback of the ordinance. We do believe that the required findings have been met. If you have questions on those, we'd be happy to try to address those in more detail. But we are recommending approval of this subject to substantial compliance with the design and location of the ADU as indicated on the submitted sketch plan and elevations. And I'd be happy to answer any questions the board might have.
I haven't seen one of these before, so this is all new to me. Is there the potential, first of all, utilities? Are there separate, I'm assuming there's separate utility connections for the primary residence and the ADU?
I think that would be a question better probably posed to the petitioner. We don't know. That's not something that we looked into. I think, that's up to the utility providers, whether or not they would
Okay.
require that.
Yeah, I was curious about utilities, specifically easements. And then the other thing I was interested in is, does this have the potential in the future to be subdivided and sold off as a completely separate parcel?
So the size of the lot, I mean, maybe I'm speaking uneducatedly here, as I just said a non-word, I think. I mean, my presumption would be that similar to when you have a detached garage, it's probably going to run electricity, from the main connection at the house. And I think, utilities would probably allow tie-ins, but again, especially sewer, I think would probably be the main one that would be a question. And I'm sorry, now I'm blanking on what your other question or comment was. Oh, yes, thank you, Dan. Yeah, so with the size of this site, being 1.33 acres, it well exceeds the UDO requirement for lot size and lot width, to be able to potentially in the future subdivide into multiple lots. So absent any kind of, condition, that would be, I mean, that's also part of staff's justification for why we don't think it would have a negative impact on the neighborhood, is that it won't look like you're squeezing something in. I guess that would be at the board's discretion, whether it's a concern that in the future they could file for a plat and meet all the requirements to make this into a separate lot.
The size of the dwelling.
And again, the reason I ask is typically for an accessory structure, all utilities will be provided through the main structure. And I'm going, man, if they cut this thing out, is that going to cause all sorts of problems in the future? So that's the only reason I asked.
Sure. And just to elaborate, I guess, on the whether they might parcel it off, the proposed size of this is just under 800 square feet. And the ordinance actually has a maximum size for an accessory dwelling unit, which would be 800 square feet. So they're just under that. Actually, they had proposed being a little bigger than that, and we told them they needed a variance for that before they filed, and they revised it to get it under that standard so that they could avoid filing for a variance for that. But if this were to be a separate standalone house, the R2 district has a minimum ground floor area of 960 square feet. So they wouldn't meet that. I'm not sure. It might be for Linda to comment on whether that would be something that would prevent it from being platted without a variance.
If they wanted to, in the future, come in to split this lot as a plat, we would require either a variance for the minimum square footage of the home, or they would have to add on to the home to meet our minimum square footage. And going back to the utility connections, we didn't check that, but there used to be a house attached to this garage. So there probably is separate utility.
Those easements probably already exist. Okay. Any other questions for staff? We're right here from petitioner.
My name is Epifanio Carvajal, 1338 Fletcher Avenue, Indianapolis, Indiana. Case petition number SE 24-03, requesting the approval for a special exception to allow accessory dwelling. When you guys talking about the utilities, I'm not sure if the owner is gonna put a direct, because the distance from the from the house to the dwelling that they propose to build, I see pretty large to run electricity from there. I don't know if they are gonna install a new generator or not. It's something that I will discuss, but if you guys have something that they must have to have done, I'll make sure that we'll obey those rules. Other than that, I mean, just like we showed there, we're gonna move the house 5 feet away from where it is now so we can meet the 7 feet setback.
Is the existing structure going to be torn down and then you're just going to use part of the foundation, or?
It's gonna be removed, the roof definitely, because it's gonna be 5 feet will be cut off. But 5 feet of the foundation is gonna be removed. The rest of it will stay there. I would say most of the walls will stay there except the interior. I'm just referring to the exterior walls. Those will remain there. Whatever is good to be safe.
So part of the actual building will stay there in addition to the foundation?
Would you repeat that again, please?
So part of the existing building, part of it will be removed, but part of it will stay?
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and open up the public hearing at 7:54. Is there anyone signed up to speak?
No one has signed up except the petitioner.
Would anyone like to speak? And with no one coming forward, we will close the public hearing as it's 7:54. We will continue with discussion.
So just a question that you had brought up too. So an accessory dwelling still has to have the same utilities as a primary dwelling, so sewer and,
It's required to have sewer and water, just like any other dwelling in Avon.
okay,
Whether it has its own lateral versus, or its own electric separate meter, that's up to the petitioner.
so it'll have to connect to city sewer.
Correct.
Okay, all right, and city water.
Any other discussion? If there's none, we'll entertain a motion.
I move that we approve SC 2403 8759 East County Road 200 North, a special exception to allow for an accessory dwelling unit in R1, subject to the conditions outlined within the published staff report, since it has satisfied all the requirements for variances of development standards under state law and subject to the approved findings of fact.
A motion by Mrs. Ransberg. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Second by Mrs. Inman. Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Guckenberger,
4.
Inman,
4.
Ransberg,
4.
Turner.
4.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think that's it.
There's a staff report.
Yeah, is that,
Oh, no, that was part of this. Never mind. Just other business. Oh, you have it. Okay.
so there's oh, okay, it was just the document. I'm going, whoa.
I
looks
know,
like
it
the same
confused me
case.
too.
Any other business? Then we are adjourned. Thank you.